Welcome back. In the next two modules, we'll focus on regulatory monitoring. This presentation, part 1, is on external monitoring. Regulatory monitoring can be applicable to flour, premix, and even foods made with flour depending on what is specified in the legislation. This form of monitoring is conducted by government inspectors with the aim of ensuring that products available to consumers are properly fortified. Regulatory monitoring is broken down into three component parts: external monitoring, import monitoring, and commercial monitoring. In part 1 of this module, we'll cover external monitoring. External monitoring takes place at flour mills that are expected to fortify. In most countries with fortification legislation, mills that produce at least 20 metric tons of flour per day are required to be part of the fortification program. The two components of external monitoring are technical audits and factory inspections, which will be elaborated upon in a moment. Mill personnel should be informed at the start of the fortification program that they will be visited, unannounced, by inspectors and will be held accountable for complying with the quality assurance (QA) and quality control (QC) protocols and the fortification standard. For this reason, mill personnel should be ready at all times to provide documentation for the procedures that are followed to produce properly fortified flour. The frequency of audit and inspection visits is determined by the human and financial resources available, the number of flour mills in the country, and the type of equipment used in the majority of those mills. Some countries conduct audit and inspection visits monthly, while others with highly automated mills and long-standing programs do one audit inspection visit annually. As a general rule, audit and inspection visits should be considered a regular priority in the early years of the flour fortification program. To start with, let's talk about technical audits. During a technical audit, food control authorities review written QA/QC protocols and records and observe the flour fortification process in action. This checklist was produced for use during audits in the Solomon Islands. Yes means the mill complies fully. No means there is a problem. Notes should be taken whenever an inspector finds something that does not comply. This checklist has the following main components: the date and the time of the inspection, the mill, and the name of the inspector. And it covers the following aspects. Part 1 covers cleaning and sanitation of the production area, packaging area, warehouse, staff facilities and toilets and surroundings. Part 2 covers personnel, namely hygiene, the use of protective clothing, and training in the tasks that they perform. Part 3, written procedures or instructions for receipt and storage of premix, the feeder verification, sampling of the wheat flour for quality control, and the use of the iron spot test for wheat flour. Part 4 covers micronutrient premixes, the premix inventory, the certificate of analysis. Does the certificate of analysis comply with the national standard, if there is one? Premix is appropriately stored. First in, first out system is used for circulation. Premix is handled correctly. Part 5, the wheat flour fortification process. Records of the feeder performance are available. The level of premix in the feeder, is it adequate during the visit? Records of production and premix use up to date. Flour samples taken for iron spot test daily. Corrective actions taken when, and ratio of wheat flour produced to premix is not correct, as an example. 6. Fortified wheat flour. Records of flour samples analyzed using the iron spot test, quantitative method for iron in an external lab, and quantitative method for folic acid in an external lab. Weekly flour samples are stored. Composite monthly flour samples are stored. The last quarterly composite sample stored and available. The labeling meets national standards. The fortified flour is stored properly, and a first in, first out stock rotation system is applied to the shipment of the flour. Many people who have just a general awareness of external monitoring think that the focus should be on the collecting and quantitative testing of flour samples. In fact, inspectors should put the largest emphasis on audits. If QA and QC practices are in place and well followed, one can be fairly certain that the flour coming from that mill is fortified properly. Now, on to factory inspections. Inspections, which are more labor-intensive and complex than audits, are a means to verify that fortified flour complies with the country's standard. During an inspection, samples are taken from either the end of the production line or the packaging area, from the mill warehouse, and from the composite sample storage area. Samples from the production line or packaging area represent the flour quality of the day, whereas samples from the warehouse and composite sample storage area are indicative of the mill's fortification quality over a period of time. Please note that the following 3 slides will refer to the production line rather than the packaging area, but the sampling procedures are identical. Prior to obtaining single samples of flour from the end of the production line, the inspector needs to be sure the feeder is operational and contains premix. Assuming that is the case, he or she then removes a 500-gram single sample of flour from the end of the flour conveyor. This process continues once every 10 minutes until the inspector has accumulated at least 5 single samples. They are each placed in separate containers. In most countries, the qualitative iron test determines if these flour samples are fortified. For this, 100 grams of each flour sample is used. The iron spot test should be done while the inspector is at the flour mill if at all possible. To estimate the level of iron in a sample, the result can be compared to an iron spot test sample chart like the one you see here. Each mill should create their own chart because the appearance at half treatment, target treatment and double treatment may not be identical to this chart. Assuming all 5 single flour samples are fortified, the remainder of each, approximately 400 grams, is combined into one composite sample. Unfortified samples are indicated as such on the inspection report. A reason for the failure must be determined. Most large mills have a holding area or warehouse, where flour is held briefly until it is shipped to the retail market. Assuming such an area exists at the mill, the inspector randomly chooses at least 5 flour bags. A 500 grams single sample of flour is obtained from each using a sampling spear. Flour millers should be ready to move flour sacks if requested. A qualitative test is used to verify that the flour samples are fortified, after which the remainder of each fortified sample will be combined into a single composite sample. As you recall from the internal monitoring module, flour millers make and store composite samples from every order or shift. In addition to the samples collected from the production area and the warehouse for external monitoring purposes, the inspector also obtains 3 composite samples chosen at random from the storage area. Since the iron spot test was already used on these samples during internal monitoring procedures, it does not need to be conducted again. At the end of the visit, Inspectors should have one composite sample from the production line or packaging area, one composite sample from the mill warehouse, and 3 composite samples taken from the composite sample storage area. Generally, 5 composite samples are sufficient for pointing out a problem at a flour mill. However, if legal action needs to be taken against a flour mill, sampling methods have to follow codex. Codex information can be found in the References section of this module. These 5 composite samples should be divided into at least 2 smaller samples. One part should be kept as a reference at the mill. The other part should undergo quantitative testing at a laboratory. All mill samples should be labeled with the name of the mill, the date of the inspection, the lot number, and sample number or ID. At the end of an audit and inspection visit, the inspector should give a verbal summary of the key findings. Items to discuss include the audit checklist, observations taken during the visit, results of qualitative analyses, recommendations for improvement, and necessary corrective actions if required. The inspector is responsible for transporting or shipping the samples to the designated government or third-party laboratory as prescribed by the country's monitoring plan for quantitative analysis. The composite samples should be well mixed prior to testing. To maximize time and resources, it is recommended that laboratories quantitatively test just 1 or 2 marker nutrients. Iron is frequently chosen because it's easier to measure than most of other fortificants. And as mentioned previously, if sodium iron EDTA is the type of iron used, added iron can be measured rather than just total iron. A written report must be sent to each flour mill 2 to 4 weeks after an audit and inspection visit. The report needs to include all the items that were explained during the verbal report, plus the results of the quantitative analyses. Additionally, if corrective actions are requested, notification of a follow-up visit is provided in the report. The results for the tested micronutrients should be close to the target micronutrient content as indicated by the fortification standard and need to fall within the acceptable range of variation. For example, if the standard provides a target value of 50 parts per million for total iron with a range of 40 to 60 parts per million, then samples that fall within that range comply with the standard. In this chart, sample number 5 fails to comply. In most countries, the producer passes the audit and inspection if 1. The quality management system indicates fortification is controlled properly. 2. Internal monitoring QA/QC procedures are documented and appropriately followed. Relevant data are recorded, and if 80% of samples fulfill the fortification standard. Looking back at our example, 80% of the composite samples fulfilled the fortification standard. Assuming all other criteria were appropriately met, this mill would pass the audit and inspection visit. Assuming the mill managers agree with the quantitative test results, the reference samples can now be discarded. If the mill managers do not agree with the findings of the quantitative test, the reference samples can be sent to a reference laboratory for analysis. However, the mill must pay for the cost of the analysis. If serious indications of non-compliance, such as a significant overage of micronutrient levels or other food safety concerns were uncovered as a result of the audit inspection visit, the product in the warehouse can be held and production may be temporarily halted. The reasons for such problems require an investigation to pinpoint the causes. Appropriate corrective action steps must be put in place. If less drastic concerns arise during the inspection, a follow-up visit should take place after a reasonable period of time. This gives the producer a chance to implement required corrective actions. During this second visit, the government inspector focuses on those issues that necessitated the extra visit. If the corrective actions have not been executed, the inspector should work with the flour mill to understand the constraints and problems more thoroughly and assist with reasonable requests for help. Ultimately, however, fines and penalties according to law may be imposed if the mill fails to show a commitment to make the required changes. The milling community should be informed of consequences resulting from persistent non-compliance prior to or when the fortification program commences. Before moving on to the next module, I'd like to draw your attention to one very important side note. A primary role of food inspectors is to monitor parameters in various food products, including flour, whether or not it is fortified. General flour characteristics that are monitored include protein and moisture content. The external monitoring protocols for the fortification program should be integrated into ongoing food inspection procedures and sampling schedules for flour. This makes monitoring the flour fortification program more practical and efficient. Where food control authorities already monitor flour and collect flour samples to test general flour parameters, fortification-specific data can be integrated into existing forms and report templates. Sample volumes may only need to be increased as required for the additional nutrient analyses relevant to fortification, both qualitative and/or quantitative. That concludes the first half of the regulatory monitoring section. Next, import monitoring and commercial monitoring will be discussed.